Richard Roe has won. No one stood a chance from the beginning. Those who remained alive were being executed by the hundreds, with no military to defend their people. The Arthur Army had already established itself as an unstoppable force. By the time I was halfway to my daughter's funeral, major cities had been decimated. Richard Roe's army had killed them all. Not just the men, but the women and children too. I had to be quick, or else I'd attract unwanted attention by any Arthros that were still lurking around. I traveled through various states, trying to take country roads and abandoned highways. My Camry was almost out of fuel. I couldn't use a GPS because I kept getting no signal on all my devices. I was on a desolate highway, when on the horizon I could see a gas station coming up. I made a pit stop there. I went inside of the gas station trying to gather supplies. I grabbed as much medical equipment as I could. The pain in my abdomen was worse than it had been before leaving Nevada. I looked down to see that I was slightly bleeding, the blood stain soaking through the bandages. The gas station was empty, so I took advantage of the radio that had been left behind in the counter. I tried tuning the radio to see if there was any news or any station that could pick up, but I got mostly static, until I kept tuning it and there was a voice. It was a man's voice. He seemed to be talking about the events that were occurring currently. He was talking about the neurotransmitter needle, the ones used by Richard Roe. It seems as though the monoliths that were set were used to make the brain unconscious, but only certain times a pulse was released, so there were people still alive, but not for long. The man went on to say that there were a few ways to avoid the signal being sent from the monoliths and onto the cell towers. The cell towers amplify the power of the signals and subdue the brain into unconsciousness. The power of the cell towers were more so designed for when the victim is asleep, which made sense why the employee only went into the metaverse when they were asleep. So I had to stay awake in order to prevent myself from falling unconscious permanently. I grabbed as many supplies as I could that would keep me awake. I decided to keep moving. It was already nighttime when I saw that a dense fog had fallen upon this desolate area. I could barely see the Camry in front of me. I placed the supplies in the trunk and filled the tank. When I was done, I stopped for a minute and listened to my surroundings. I could hear footsteps, but not just one. It sounded like a group of people were approaching the gas station. I thought maybe there were people stranded and needed to find help. I waited for a moment until I saw a faint glow. It wasn't just one glow. I started to see 3, then 4. Then I counted 10 glowing lights coming in my direction. I got into my car once I realized what these lights were. I put the key into the ignition and turned the car on. I hesitated for a moment and I saw a hand on the window. It was an Arthro. It tried to break the glass. Luckily it held, and I was able to shift into drive and leave. I just kept driving into the fog at very high speeds, but I'd rather not run into any of those things. I drove in an area full of dense woods. There was no signal, so hopefully the signal was not strong enough to affect me. I parked into the woods so I wouldn't be visible. My eyelids were getting heavy, and I finally fell asleep. I woke up. I was happy that I was still awake in the real world. I continued on with my trip, and after crossing the border to California, it was time that I needed to refill with gas. I found another gas station in a small town. The town was desolated, but everything was perfectly normal. Almost. When I drove around the town, I could see a few bodies lying around. They seemed to be homeless people that fell asleep, without knowing the tragedy that would come over them. I was able to stop at another gas station and fill up my car. As I was done gathering supplies from the gas station, I saw a glimpse of a group of Arthros marching through the streets. They were synchronized, walking in a distinct pattern. I crouched down and looked through the window, making sure they wouldn't notice me. I noticed they were carrying something behind their backs. They were other people. I decided to wait until they were completely out of view. If there was one of them, there had to be more. There was a nearby apartment complex that I could stay until nighttime, since the sound of my car's engine would only attract attention. I snuck around the back of the gas station and in the backyard of the apartment complex. I climbed over the front gate and quickly made my way into the apartment. The front door was busted open, so I assumed a patrol of Arthros had already passed by. I snuck inside. There could well have been Arthros inside, so I kept quiet as much as I could. I quietly turned the knob on each door, looking for an empty room to rest while night falls. I came across a door on the 3rd floor that was unlocked. I quietly went inside. It was a normal-looking apartment with a bedroom. I sat on the couch and rested for a while. I decided I would sleep for a few hours before the signal tower sent a pulse again. I set an alarm before the sun went down. Richard Rowe had used humanity's greatest need into its greatest weapon. I felt a vibration, but it wasn't my phone. The whole room was trembling. I could faintly hear footsteps. The realization that there were Arthurs approaching made me sober up in a matter of seconds. I crept around looking for a place to hide. There was a bedroom with a bed, so I took the opportunity to hide under the bed. I heard the door fall down, then more footsteps as I could see the Arthro walk around. Then it stopped. It walked towards the bed I was under. I could hear my heart pounding as the Arthro got closer. It stopped in front of the bed. I heard its mechanism as it just stood there. Then I heard a rumbling on top of the bed. The Arthro left carrying a body. I took a long-winded sigh of relief. When the footsteps were far away enough from the room, I crept into the living room. I looked around for an exit. I spotted a fire escape. I quickly opened the window. As I was trying to get out, my eyes met with another Arthro, Werner Weenie. It attacked me quickly. I had no choice but to jump as it tried to grab me. I managed to grab onto a rail not too far down, until I lost my grip and fell the rest of the way down. I landed hard onto the ground. I felt myself to make sure I didn't break anything. I had some adrenaline left to make it to the car. I looked behind me. There was a whole mob coming. I got inside and started the car and drove off. I looked at the GPS for a quick moment. I was only 3 hours away. I had to stay strong to see her one final time. I drove for what seemed like forever. I drove through the city until I saw it, an opening. It was an abandoned church ground. There were rows of graves and crosses scattered across the plain. The other gravestones, they were the ones from the lab, as I could recognize a few of them. I looked at every single grave, looking for her name, Penelope Goldsworth. Richard Goldsworth? Is that you? I looked behind me. There she was, just as beautiful as I saw her the first day we met. And now, after all this time, I'm so sorry, Bellflower. I couldn't save her, our daughter. She's dead. It's all my fault because of it. Her body was buried alongside a beautiful spring meadow. My daughter Penelope, she was finally resting in peace. It's not your fault, Ricky. I'm sorry for not believing you all this time. You did everything you could to save her, to save everyone. Ashley told me everything the day you left. She had called me while she was in the hospital. I heard the news on TV. I was given directions here on my phone. Those things, they didn't harm me. It's almost as if that Richard Rowe entity gave us a chance to see each other. We're finally a family again. Bellflower got closer, and for the first time in over a year, the love that had been deprived from me had returned. The warmth of her body gave me a feeling of ease, almost as if all my problems had disappeared for once in my life. I could be happy, and all my problems would be gone. She had brought a gentian flower, the one that Penelope was so fond of. I grabbed her hand, and we gently placed the flower on top of her grave. You did good, Ricky. Now please rest. My knees buckled. I collapsed on the ground, Bellflower kneeling to make sure I was all right. My wound had completely opened, my hand covered in blood. My fate was sealed. You're right, I smiled. After all this time, I never got a chance to admire the world. I was always focused on technology. Now I can see the beauty of the world. You know, Belle, Richard Rowe's punishment turned out to be a gift, and I will finally be with her in paradise. He gave me that wish either way. Please don't go. The rat in her hands couldn't deny what had to happen. I gave her one last hug, both of us shedding a tear. I love you, Belle. I love you too, Ricky. I closed my eyes. The light of the moon and stars faded away. They called me a madman. They said I couldn't bring her back. But death had lost before we began this game. This was the true nature of the metaverse. She had become a part of it. I was able to separate her from it. And she had returned. Jane Doe. I missed you, good friend.